Three tomatoes are walking down the street. Papa tomato, mama tomato, and baby tomato. Baby tomato starts lagging behind, and Papa tomato gets really angry. Goes back and squishes him. Says, ketchup. Ketchup. See you around.
It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Green, gardening, and environment radio. Flavored with a dash of humor. Welcome to intelligent, irreverent talk about plants and the planet they grow on. Your questions, comments, and participation are always welcome at 877-711-5611.
Good planets are hard to find. Temperate zones and tropic climes. True currents and thriving seas. Wind blowing through breathing trees. Strong ozone and safe sunshine. Well, good planets are hard to find. Good planets are in the main.
This hour is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts. Every tree needs a champion. Go to bartlett.com.
Jet streams, perfect air.
And here they are, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
Well, good planets are in the main. Right.
Okay, let's take that very loud music out of there right now.
What?
I can't hear. Huh? Randall, you might consider bringing that down just a little bit into our headsets. Welcome to the show. Boy, I am so excited about this today because this is the time of year, folks, when this is what everybody waits for. We've had COVID-19, we've had social unrest, and a lot of people, all they want to do right now is they want to plant tomatoes, okay? And they want to be safe in their backyards. They want to plant tomatoes. They want the tomatoes to work because there's never been more of an urgency to grow things in your own yard. And so I've got two of the best right here on the show with us this morning. We have KC Tomato from, of course, the KC area of the heart of the country. And then from the elite East Coast, we have we have Craig LeHoullier, who's just moved. You're the NC Tomato. The nicknames you should know, folks. We've got KC Tomato and NC Tomato Man. That's Craig, and he's in North Carolina. And you just did a big move in the middle of all this pandemic, didn't you?
One day, my wife Sue and I were sitting on the couch in October, and we looked at each other and we said, it's time to downsize. It's time to move. Jumped on Zillow, found a house, moved, sold our house, all within 3 months. Just before COVID hit, somehow we got it all done. So now we are in Hendersonville, North Carolina, kind of in the mountains, a place where Keith is quite familiar. We've been sharing notes on places that he's visited, and I now live here. So gardening is very different from me here. I've jumped from a zone 7 to a zone 8. A zone 8 to a zone 7. I'm gardening on a septic field. I'm gardening above ground, and I'm having the time of my life.
Well, going from, by the way, you said Keith, and that is KC Tomato.
Yeah.
That's his real name. And I want to tell you, Casey or Keith, however we're going to call you today, you look like you're sitting in the West Wing right now.
I call it the East Wing of the house. Actually.
That's the East Wing of the house. Okay,
so you're looking south.
We're looking south. Craig, you're now in zone 7. And I was going to say, going from zone 8 to zone 7 doesn't seem like a big deal. What zone are you in there, Casey?
It depends on who you ask. It used to be 5, but it's probably 6 now.
All right. So I'm in a 5/6 zone here. I can tell you that when I had a house in the Pacific Northwest, that was zone 8, but it was a different kind of zone 8 and you're nodding, Craig, from what you have in North Carolina, because it was maritime influence. You didn't expect to grow really good tomatoes where we were.
You didn't have the degree days. And I remember one of my first talks was at the PNW Flower Show. And I was showing how Raleigh and Seattle are in the same zone. And we had 850-degree days and they had 400. And that right there was why they had trouble ripening their tomatoes. They just did not get the heat. Big effect.
And I think this is a really good lesson to start with for folks who are gardeners, and they look at the USDA hardiness zone map and they go, oh, I'm in 5, I'm in 7, I'm in 8, whatever. There's different kinds of 7s and 8s and 5s. You go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, the zones really talk about when you can plant things out and when they're going to die by frost, but it doesn't tell the full story of everything that happens in between. So as Keith will know, what I'm going to expect going from Raleigh, where we had 60 days of 90 or above last year, to Hendersonville, where we may have 2 or 3, I'm going to have better tomato fruit set, because all of my big beefsteaks won't have fruit set problems when we have 5 days in a row of 95 degrees and the humidity is high. So, but what I'm going to do this year is just observe and see how it goes. I have got a lot to learn,
Well, how many plants do you have right now? And folks should know that, yeah, you know, this is a guy. All right, this is where we give the plug. Craig is the author of this book, Epic Tomatoes, How to Select and Grow the Best Varieties of All Time. He's trying to get to 100,000 copies, folks, sold so that he can do the second version of it. Those mean publishers are saying, you need to sell 40,000 more copies of this book before we're going to let you do that. And of course, what I'm going to do, because I did this before, while we're doing book plugs, Attack of the Killer Asparagus is available at aroundtheblockpress.com. Write me if you want a copy of that. And all of my hundreds of people who bought this book will tell you what a fine book it is.
Yes, it is.
What about you, Casey? When's your book coming out?
Probably never gonna write a book. I'll do a radio show.
You can. I'll tell you what, Keith. You can have mine. All right, right now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'd like to do like the furniture guys did back in the '90s. Do a gardening show like the furniture guys. You remember them? You don't?
No, I don't think.
Ed Feldman, Joe Valerio, they were on TLC or something like that. But they fixed furniture, but they made esoteric references all the time to what they were doing, and they were really smart, but they were really witty. East Coast. It's funny show.
Well, I'm disqualified already. I'm just not.
Okay, sorry about that.
All of that.
Keith, how about the tomato version of This Old House?
This old tomato.
Yeah.
This old tomato. I like it. Except you don't want an old tomato. You want a fresh tomato.
I have a story about that, but that's for later.
I did the website thing in the past, but and I used to answer a lot of questions like Craig had done, but I started getting really strange questions early on, and I was also associated with the university, so I had to be really careful about what I said because it was very early on in the internet. And somebody wrote me one time and asked, "Can I put antifreeze in my wall of waters?" And I don't know whether they were asking me, "Can I or should I?" But it kind of threw me there because I'm like, I'm not really sure what they're doing, and it's not a good idea, but. When I started getting things like that, and then Google came along and more questions were being answered, I kind of backed off the whole thing. People were more interested in me than the tomato website. I wanted to make it about tomatoes and not me.
But you're a fascinating guy, Casey.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Thank you.
So there's one thing, I don't know if I should say this or not, but yes, Keith, I get a lot of questions. And I've thought of a hashtag. I'm not on Twitter anymore, so it would be RTFB. And I won't even explain what it means, but the last word is book, and the first word is read.
Yep. An old technical writer phrase, yes.
Yeah, but that's fine, because I actually find that in these days where COVID has created zillions of new gardeners, I feel like those of us who at least are pretty good at it owe ourselves to get out there and help these new gardeners to succeed so they become longtime gardeners. We don't want people swooping in, buying a ton of seed and then all disappearing. When the first year they try to garden, they have disasters.
You want them to be successful, and we're
Want
going
them
to be breaking.
successful.
Yes, you want them to do this again, not just when there's a pandemic. Although there may be one every year now, we just don't know. We have a little more than a minute in this first segment, but before we move on, see, Casey, I have to. When you make a reference, you got to explain it. And when you say wall of water, what are you referring to?
They are a product that have cells in it, and you fill it up with water and you put them around plants, and it's supposed to bring the heat in and make them produce a little bit earlier. They're like little greenhouses that you put around water.
And it looks kind of like the Devil's Tower out of Close Encounters. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. I was thinking like a radiator that you can bend around, but because that's kind of what it is too.
I don't want Richard Dreyfuss in my garden.
No, he'll rip it up. Yeah.
All right. So here's what we need to do. Is tell folks who are watching us and listening to us, get your tomato questions in right now, because we're going to dive into this. I'm going to talk about mine. Peggy will talk about hers. Casey and Craig. And send us on Facebook and on Twitter, or you can even call us 877-711-5611. We haven't used a phone in more than 3 months, so for a phone call. So let's try it. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. It's Tomatomania II with Casey and NC, and we will be right back.
Killer.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes comes in the second hour today, just so you know. So anyway, I got an umbrella hooked up at gaffer's tape to this tree coat rack, and it's sitting above me. So that's the only way I can do this in this part. Hey, folks, it's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We've got our tomato guys here on the Zoom machine, and we actually have a phone call that had come pouring in. So let's go to the phone, and welcome to the Mike Nowak Show.
Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Love your show. Hello. I had a question about curling tomato leaves.
Okay.
Go for it.
I have 2 out of 8 tomatoes where the leaves are completely curled up around themselves, and I'm not seeing any discoloration, and I can't find any bugs. And so Mike said, call in if you have a question. So I called in.
What's the variety?
I think they're both KC tomatoes. One is a garden treasure, not the garden gem.
No,
and
that's
the
not
other
a
is a Delta.
That's not a
That's
KC.
not a KC.
Tomato. That's a Dr. Harry Clee from the University of Florida.
Okay. And then the other is Delta Queen.
That is a KC tomato.
So should I, or do they have a virus? Should I pull them out?
No, I don't. I don't think you have a virus. Have you cultivated any? Have you hoed around them recently, or disturbed the soil in any way?
I don't think so. We had a huge storm, really windy day, 3 or 4 days ago.
Okay, so
but I haven't disturbed the soil around them.
If you don't see browning or really strange looking growth, so there's 2 things right now. What I probably think it is leaf roll, and so the top of the plant is getting out of balance with the roots, and the leaves will roll up, and it'll want to change the water status. So if there's been a quick change, plants respond to that physiologically, and usually plants grow out of that. It could also be, this is the time of year when everybody's spraying lawn chemicals, and 2,4-D, dicamba, those things they use in the lawn, tomato plants are very sensitive to them. And so a neighbor 4 or 5 houses up sprays on a windy day, and a little bit comes and hits your plants and causes it to happen. Without seeing it, I doubt that's what it is, but a lot of people are showing that.
Yeah, this is in a community garden.
It's a community garden. Well, it could be anybody spraying a lot near their roadways. In Kansas, there was a documented case of 2,4-D drifting 8 miles. Now we're out in the open more and more wind and all that, but the point is it can come in from a long ways away, and it doesn't need very much for it to do it. But I don't probably think it is. I think it's something leaf roll the way you describe it, and it usually grows out of it. It's not a problem.
Certain varieties actually will have a genetic propensity to roll. I gave somebody a plant of a Rosso Sicilian once, and it always rolls. It's just the way it is genetically. And it was in a community garden, and everybody was demanding that he pull it out. And I took the person to my garden, and I showed them the same plant. And I said, this plant rolls its leaves. Costaludo genovese is another one. But yeah, Keith's right. I think it's physiological. In the absence of aphids on the back of the leaves and on the absence of discoloration, see what happens in a few days.
And what I would say is I agree with both of you guys, because this is my friend Mac who's calling in, and that's how she got the 2 tomatoes, because
I wondered.
Hey, Mac.
And,
Hi.
I'm passing them along to everybody, Casey. And what happened in Chicago recently, I think is a perfect setup for that. We had record rains in May. We had really hot, humid weather last week. And all of a sudden we had this front come through with 70-mile-an-hour winds and dropping temperatures into the 60s and 50s. And it sounds like Keith, it's the perfect setup for, this sort of situation.
Yeah, we get a lot of that here, the real quick change. I mean, we're up and down in the weather just like you guys are. Ours isn't really that much difference. We're a little bit hotter in the summer, but you probably get more rain up there than we do here.
I think another interesting thing to do as you become more experienced as a tomato grower is take a look at your plants at different times of the season, at different times of the day. The greens show different as the sun is hitting at a different angle. A lot of times on a hot day, the plants will be in the morning, they'll be really vibrant. And then as the day comes on, it's starting to cool off at night, the leaves all just kind of relax a little bit. And so learning to read your plants is just a lot of fun, and finding out what they look like when they're happy, what they look like at different weather conditions. And it's just, well, it probably also shows kind of the insanity that I'm taking this hobby. When I first met Keith and he was walking through my garden, slogging through in knee-deep mud, we were actually looking at tomato flowers, tomato leaves, deciding what variety it was, looking at the foliage. So one can go deep, right, Keith?
Yep, quite a bit.
Well, Mac, thank you so much for calling. That's a great question and a great way for us to start. And so basically just keep up the good care of the plants and they'll probably recover, is what we're hearing.
Yeah, and I won't lose any more sleep about them.
Okay, good. All right. Anybody, we'll talk to you later, Mac. Have a great Sunday. The phone number is 877-711-5611. We're going to take a break, and I want to ask you guys what you're doing right now when we come back.
Yep, and we got a
show with Peggy Malecki. We'll be right back.
Tomato Land. Tomato Land.
What is that?
Tomato Land.
Tomato Land.
Oh!
Tomato Land.
Never heard this one.
I know, it's brand new. I found this on the inner tubes. I was cruising the used tubes on the inner tubes, and Tomato Land, and it had only like 500 likes. And I said, but I listened to it, and I went, I like that.
Yeah.
I'm keeping that as a tomato song for our show. And you have
kind
to
of
the shades when you listen to
do.
it.
Yeah, kind of the COVID cruise line.
Yikes.
The lounge singer.
Tomato Land.
Dark humor, dark humor.
Never going back to Tomato Land. Okay. Well, welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Yikes. This is Tomatomania II, and after this, there will never be a Tomatomania III.
Oh, there must.
Yeah, there has to be. We have to look at how I have this tomato that's been lasting forever. Next year, we're going to look at it again.
And I have just one thing to say to you, Casey.
Yes. Oh.
I don't think it worked.
No.
Okay, never mind. I tried. See, whenever I try these sound effects, sometimes they're working and sometimes they're not, and I do not understand why. Okay, never mind. I can't,
Because
it's not real radio anymore. It's just, if I can't play a sound effect, it ain't real radio. So it's just something else.
do you at least have your no pen?
I'm going to try to fix this, but meanwhile, we had a question coming in Facebook, right? Peg?
Yes. Paul is asking, how often should I feed my tomato plants with an organic tomato food, and what should I do?
Sure. So I'll start, and I want to hand it over to Keith to finish. But really, how often you feed and what you feed. First of all, what you feed with is definitely tied into your own personal gardening philosophy, traditional, organic, conventional, etc. And there's a zillion. My view is it's not so much what exactly you feed with, it's that you feed it so that you don't essentially starve the plant. If you're in containers, if you're in straw bales, if you're in raised beds, if you're above the ground where water's going to come in and leach out the food faster, you feed more frequently. If you're in a garden where you've got that well underneath that the roots can go in and find the nutrients, you don't have to feed as often. So I'm a container straw bale gardener and I'm feeding weekly, but I'm also feeding weekly, W-E-E-K, W-E-E-A-K, giving that plant a little bit of food each week. I'm watering a lot, and then backing it up the following week, and my plants look good, they're producing great, and it's working for me. So Keith, anything you want to toss into that one?
Being organic throws it off a little bit more because it's not quite as available. But assuming you're in the ground, usually just a general rule is to apply it before you plant, and then a couple of weeks later when the tomatoes start setting and they get, I don't know, a little bit like golf ball size if they're beefsteaks or something, then you would side dress. And if your season goes on, you don't have a lot of disease and everything, go ahead and apply some. The organics are going to take longer depending on the source of the organic. If you're using fish emulsion, it'll be readily available. But all the other granular stuff, it's going to take a while. So you want it down there by the roots. You want to get water to it so that the activity occurs to be able to release it to the plant. So it's a being ahead of the game in that situation, but you really don't want to go too much over. And you get too much nitrogen in particular, and you'll probably increase your disease problems by feeding it.
I didn't realize there was a connection between nitrogen and disease problems. I knew there was a connection between nitrogen and not enough blossoms, and fruit production.
Right, and you can overdo it, and a lot of people overdo it. And the professor that I worked with, and they're at NC State, and it actually lives down the road from Craig now. He always said that people over fertilize their tomatoes, especially in commercial situations. But he was always like, try to cut back on it a little bit, and don't get, because you get too much foliage. It's kind of a good thing. It shades the plant and everything, but you can actually get into a luxury foliage situation where you're kind of taken away from the rest. So it's again, like Craig said, observe your plants, watch them, learn from them. They'll tell you what they need. You'll pick up on it after a while. But a general rule of thumb is when you pre-plant, when they're setting and sizing up, and then you're good to go.
What about containers?
Containers, like Craig said, you have to do it more often. It's hard to take the granular and sprinkle it at the top and wash it down. So something like a fish emulsion, or a lot of people are having success with comfrey. So you go comfrey and you chop it up and you make a tea out of it. And it actually provides nitrogen to the plant because it's probably what it's going to need the most in that container. Because if you give it something ahead of time, like potassium, it's probably going to be there.
Okay, so now you just said that nitrogen's a problem, but you're saying the plant needs nitrogen when it's in the container.
In a container, because like Craig said, the water's going through, it's leaching.
So I'm watering
the soil
daily.
moisture's changing.
In hot weather, I'm watering once a day, sometimes twice a day, because you don't want your plant to stress. If that plant can't find water and stresses, that's your invitation to blossom end rot. So you really want that foliage nice and healthy and not wilted throughout the day.
You shouldn't use the wilted leaf as a sign that you need to water, which a lot of people do with their plants. They say, oh, when the leaves start to wilt, I'll water because I know. But no, you need to stay ahead of that game.
Yeah, you need to stay ahead. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question I have. Speaking for me as a COVID castaway here, and who's been locked in, and I don't have access to emulsion. And I was looking in my garage when I was planting, and I found a fertilizer, and it was an organic fertilizer, slightly higher in potassium than nitrogen, and that was what I had. So that I figured that's probably what I'm looking for to start. And then I put I put compost in there. And what if I'm kind of stuck with the compost treatment? How often am I doing that?
My view is you really can't overdo good compost. It's taking a while to break down, but it's got good structure. It will hold water, but it will also drain well. So I think my view is you can't go wrong. And I just side dress. I just dump it onto the top. There is so much great information out there about feeding that I've not really gone into a great deal of learning about the different elements. Keith is probably a little bit more up to speed on specific things about feeding and different substances. Keith?
Thanks.
Or maybe you're not. Maybe yeah.
Mike, are you adding the compost into the ground ahead of time? Is that what you're talking? Are you side dressing?
I did both. When I planted my tomatoes, I put a tiny bit of that fertilizer in there with compost that I got fresh out of my compost bin in the bottom, and then in the pots I mixed in some of that compost along with the soilless mix, but I put a generous supply of compost into it. So and then a little fertilizer to that as well. So when they started, they had a good head start. Now I'm wondering during the season how often should I be adding compost?
Well, just side dress with a little bit, and you're going to be fine. I used to work before I went back to school. I worked as a estate gardener for this crazy eccentric organic lady. Taught me everything I knew about organic. That's all she did is compost, and she had me side dress compost something like every 3 weeks, I think it was, because she did everything by the moon. I'm serious. She was a hardcore, eccentric, multimillionaire gardener, and she was fantastic. Crazy lady, though. Crazy lady.
There goes your chance on getting those millions, Keith, if she's listening.
Yeah, it's long gone.
All right, we got about
three. Squandered it.
We've got about 3 minutes here before we break again, and I want folks to get a better idea of who you are. So you each have like a minute and a half. It's obvious that you know each other. So let's start with you, Craig, and tell me, who you are, what you've been doing.
So, I've been gardening for 40 years. As you mentioned, I wrote Epic Tomatoes, Growing Vegetables in Straw Bales. I've got somewhere around 110 tomato plants out there. I think 35 indeterminates, the rest are dwarf growing. I've been co-leading the dwarf tomato breeding project for about 15 years, and we've got 123 new varieties in various seed catalogs. What I am is a lapsed chemist who treats my yard like it's a laboratory and my kitchen like it's a laboratory. So instead of going in and doing my 25 years in the corporate world, which I did not like, I do the same sorts of things, but I do it here. And just having the time of my life. What I do is I answer anybody's gardening questions if they email me. But I'm 64, and I think I'm going to be doing this for the next 30 years, God willing.
And I have, and of course, your website is
just CraigLeHoullier.com. And if people want to watch my Instagram lives on Friday, find me at NC Tomato Man. 3 o'clock every Friday. I'm out there. I do a demo, and then I take everybody's questions. We do like a lightning round. Everything somebody throws at me, I answer.
Okay, and Casey.
Okay, I'm about the same as the length of time gardening. I went back. I returned to school. Like I said, I was working as an estate gardener there for a while before I went back to school. But I knew I wanted to breed. I wanted to solve problems. And I started back in school, and I got involved with the plant breeders there. I started working for them, and I worked with melons and dry beans. And the professor there encouraged me to go on to grad school, and I ended up going to North Carolina to study there under Randy Gardner. And that's how I met Craig. He lived down the street from my wife's grandfather, but he also, professor took me out to his house to show me. But I picked up on what Craig was doing, and I wanted to get flavor into tomatoes. And I also wanted to look at all these novel genes that are out there that don't get used. So I'm looking at those and developing those into new varieties, and trying to really focus in on flavors. So right now I'm working with the Seed to Kitchen people at the University of Wisconsin. I'm also working with Row 7 Seeds out of Hudson Valley.
I got to hold it right there. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back. It's Tomatomania 2.
Ooh, this is fun. And really, thank you, Mike and Peggy, for this opportunity. And it's great to see Keith, but it's great to talk tomatoes with great friends. So this is fun.
Very grateful.
What is the question? Let's give them a chance to answer it.
Let's see. What is the ratio of NPK that's best for tomatoes?
There we go. Yeah, like I said, I grabbed, and I'll admit, it was actually, it was a Dr. Earth product, and it was a rose. They said it was a rose fertilizer, and it was like 574 or something like that, or 575, and I kind of went, that's in the ballpark. That should work. Was I crazy to try that?
No. For me, the answer to his question is, well, what's the situation?
Yeah.
You know, it'd be like a doctor treating medical situations. Does your soil need more nitrogen? Is there plenty of, like my soil's got too much potassium in it. So it's really hard for me to find enough nitrogen because nitrogen sources now, especially organic, are so expensive. And so you have to look at what's really needed in that situation. And it becomes more complex, I think, when you get into containers.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, I've used 5-10-5, 10-10-10, 5-5-5, the blue stuff that you dissolve up.
The blue stuff, that's what I call it too.
And that's why my view is it's not so much exactly what you feed with, it's that you feed, and that you feed regularly and don't let your plants starve. And I've never run into any issues. And where I run into issues is when organic gardeners really want to find out more about alternatives. So for bale treatment, dried blood is one of the alternatives. To get the same level of nitrogen, you're using a lot of it. It's making the bales smell, it's drawing flies. So every action has some sort of a reaction that you have to adjust to. So there is some convenience, I guess, with being more of a conventional gardener. But if that's not your philosophy, then you've got to find out how the organic waste. I mean, don't you think, Keith? It's kind of.
Yeah, I've got my son.
Yeah.
You have to think about things.
Yeah.
You have to think about too. Like if you're adding too much of one thing and you're in this situation, then you're blocking up calcium. Yes. So my thing is, don't overlove the plants. Don't overwater. Don't overfeed, and they'll probably be fine.
Yep. I like that.
To me, that's how people kill things or get into problems, is when they overlove and give too much attention to the plants.
People keep asking me, why do my seedlings look so good? I must feed them a lot. And I'm like, I don't feed them at all. When people buy my plants, they get because I don't want to preclude anyone from buying them. I don't want somebody to come up and say, well, if you fed them with X, I can't buy them because they don't. So,
good point.
But they're absolutely fine and vibrant and green. So I think we do overdo feeding. I think nature does a pretty good job of giving the plants what they need, and they make their own, and we just boost them along a little bit.
Let's make that point when we come back, and we've got about 50 seconds here. Let's make the point about overfeeding and Casey, your point too about over anything.
Yes.
To your tomatoes. I think because they're tomatoes, we coddle them in a way we don't our beans. We don't do that to our beans, you know.
Well, and like Craig said on last year's show, put them out when they're in their 40s, when it's in the 40s.
I had them out there at 34 degrees this year.
And I want to address that too. Okay, we've got about 10 seconds
Here
left, so stand by.
Easy to find someone cheaper, but a lot harder to find someone better.
Hey, it's JT and Leanne. Join us for the Heart and Home Radio Show, brought to you by Exit Realty.
Sundays at 4 p.m. on Smart Talk.
WCGO, AM and FM.
Oh, my little tomatoes, you are so cute and red. I'll come back later on and tuck you into bed. Oh, my little tomatoes, you are so cute and sweet. I can't believe them bad vegans wanna pick you off my tree.
And hold on. Oh, at the end he goes, Rudy the man. That's another one I found that, had like 40 likes on it. And I'm like, oh, that's too cool. I like that one. It's a nice
Yeah, I like that one. That's the over-loving one.
It's called Rudy the Man. That's the name of the guy. And he's playing a uke, of course. And how can you not like a ukulele?
Yeah, we have to update it though. Tomato, they may be pink, they may be purple or brown or white or green. They don't have to be red tomatoes anymore.
No, they do. That's a really good point. They do not. I'm growing one of your dwarf varieties right now, Tasmanian chocolate.
Yeah.
Which is a darker one.
Yes.
And my kitty's tail. I don't know if you saw. She's
She made a guest appearance.
She's okay. Everybody, wait. Let's see. I got to get the camera up here. Gata, you're going to make an appearance. Here we go.
Come on, Gata.
Say hi.
Oh man. I've got the negative of that cat running around somewhere. It's kind of the opposite color range.
Look into the camera. There you go, Gata.
All right. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, you're missing the cat videos.
You got to do ventriloquism on that, Mike. You can have the cat doing the show.
That would just embarrass her. Okay, that would just embarrass her. All right, so welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Boy, we should have done 2 hours. I'm telling you, we should have just done 2 hours. And next time we will. Get that tail out of my face.
Are we in the tail end of the time here, Mike?
Yeah.
Whoa!
Oh! And we had a question come up that we want to answer because it led to a bunch of things that we talked about in the break, and some of you who are listening and watching on Facebook got to hear that. But what was the question, Peg?
So Jessica asks, what's the ratio of NPK that's best for tomatoes?
And who answered that? Craig, I think you started it.
I started, but Keith made a great point, and that's why I want him to start it, because it's like, it depends. What is your situation? What are you growing in, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll toss this to my friend over there.
There you go, Keith.
Let's see. Okay, so again, it depends on the situation and whether you're in a container or whether you're in the ground, what's your soil like. The whole point to that is, and Craig brought this up in the break, is give them something. Don't worry about it too much, but don't overlove your plants. That, to me, is what creates more problems, is people, too much fertilizer, too much water. It's like a teenage relationship, the guy or the girlfriend that smothers you. He's like, get away, So, think of it that way, just give them a little bit of love, but give them space. So
I know why
it's
my
hard
mom...
to say,
Yeah.
Because if you give them too much of something and your soil is a certain way, then certain things will build up and you won't be able to get other nutrients. It'll tie it up. It's very complex. That's why I'm kind of staying away from it. But if you just give a little bit and work with what you got, go that way.
And if something's working, stick with it. You were talking about your seedlings there, Craig, and how you don't put anything in them. And why is that?
So I plant seeds in a nice soilless mix and they pop up and they're fine. I transplant them into the same soilless mix. They get hardened off and go into the driveway. They get rained on, the sun hits them. All of a sudden, they're nice 6-7 inch plants that have not been babied and they've not been fed, and they look great. People buy my plants, they bring them home, they put them in the ground, boom, they don't miss a beat. Whereas they'll get coddled plants from greenhouses that have been overfed or they're too tall. They put them in the ground, they bend over, they sulk for a while. So I think there is something about tough love with tomatoes in many steps of the way. When you're transplanting them, it's okay if you break a root. Anything that you put under the soil is going to create more roots. So how I like to think of tomatoes is build quality in from the front. Mulch, don't let bad soil splash up in your foliage. Space your plants adequately, let the air flow through, let the sun hit them. Because if you can try to prevent problems from happening, you're going to be a much happier tomato garden. Because once diseases start hitting, it can be really tricky to decide what to do at that point.
That's just fantastic advice. And I'll tell you, I have to cheat in my yard. I'm not like you guys. I don't have full sun. And so I have tucked my tomato plants in every little place I can that gets some sun. I've been in this house long enough. I can track the sun. I know where it's going to be at different times of the year, and that's where I put my tomatoes. And I actually took down part of my wooden fence this year, so tomatoes along that on the western side of the yard could get the late afternoon sun. And right now, I'm knocking on. I'll just hit the dinger instead of knocking on wood. Everything looks great. I even got my first tiny little tomatoes the other day, and it's been really cool here. But I'm very happy with the way things look. And as you said, Craig, the foliage looks lush. It looks dark. I'm very pleased, and I'm hoping things stay that way.
And so what we've done is, what gardeners learn is don't brag about your gardens too much, because the next day the hailstorm can come through.
Well, then I just cursed myself.
The deer will work through. I remember talking to my friend Jeff once driving home from work, and I've never seen a hailstorm in Raleigh in 20 years. What do we get the next day? We get a hailstorm that shreds my plant. So there is someone running things that has a wicked sense of humor that will put you in your place really quickly if you get too garden proud, I think.
And I need to say that Casey, I'm growing 2 varieties of yours, Sun Lucky and Delta Queen. Delta Queen was very prolific last year. It did very well. I got it was in the other yard, the next day, my dead neighbor's yard, and it sprawled. And she's still dead, by the way.
Still dead, yes.
Yeah. And it sprawled, but man, I was harvesting tomatoes all during the late summer and early fall. It was pretty amazing. And now the Sun Lucky, we're going to see. It wasn't quite as prolific, but what do those 2 tomato characteristics have?
Delta Queen has a unique gene that comes from Galapagos Island tomatoes. So it's a different pigment in it, and it has delta carotene in place of beta or lycopene. So that's why I was interested in it. It has a little bit different flavor profile, but I crossed it with a large heirloom variety to try to get size in it. So it was a very small, tiny little tomato that it came out of, a wild tomato, and so it's working out pretty well. I'm glad it did well for you. Sun Lucky has got a really complex background. It's got sun gold in it for one, but Little Lucky, which I got from Craig, and it tends to be fickle. It tends to not do anything until it gets really hot. Then it starts setting flowers, so it tends to be kind of late.
That's what I had. It had I had 2 of them, Keith, and it had a really good late crop.
All right.
I've got 1 Sun Lucky planted this year, so let's see what happens.
And Sun Lucky is the only one that hasn't blossomed yet, so I'm waiting on it right now.
A chef told me what he thought it tasted like, and this is going to ruin me forever, is it tastes like aftertaste of peanut butter.
All right.
And it was like, okay.
That's got to be our closing remark. Thank you. Casey Tomato, Craig LeHoullier, we're going to do it again. We're going to do it for 2 hours. All the information is on my website. Until next time, Peggy, go green or
go home.
Every tree needs a champion. Go to Bartlett.com. Here they are again, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
All I need is good food to eat and make me healthy, wealthy, wide awake. Lettuce, tomatoes, root and bacon. What about those sweet potatoes? All I need is good food to eat. All I need is good food to eat. All I need is good tools to
And welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, second big hour. And that song couldn't be more appropriate. All I need is good food to eat. And in this time of pandemic, for some people, it's been difficult. For some farmers, it has been hard to find customers. Although it's really interesting, Peggy, and you and I both know this because we've dealt with a number of operations, food providing operations and farms and that sort of thing. And it kind of depends. It's like our tomato conversation. It depends what your situation is. One of the things we've noticed is that some operations have so much business they can't even handle it. right now.
Yeah,
And
some of the CSAs are so busy right now.
and others are scrambling.
Mhm.
And it's hard to figure out. And I think perhaps maybe our next guest can help us sort this. Her name is Karen Lehman, and she is. All right, let me get my notes here because I'm on the wrong page, and I apologize. See, I start off right out the back, Karen.
Would you like me to introduce Karen?
Well, no, she's the Chicago Region Food System Fund Manager and Fresh Taste Director. And what we're going to talk about is the Chicago Region Food System Fund Manager, because this is an organization that has just awarded some grants to some of these operations that we've been talking about, and groups that help those operations. So by extension, people, and let me give you some of the names, because some of these people have been on our show before, like the Artisan Grain Collaborative. We talked to them a few weeks ago about their neighbor loaves and how, and you can do that. I put the link on MikeNovak.net today as well, so that you can click on and you can donate a loaf of bread. That's simple. You go in and say, I want to donate a loaf, and they'll bake a bunch of them. Then they'll make sure they get to the loaves to people who really need them. Somebody else we have on the show regularly, the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, just got a grant. Plant Chicago just got a grant. And what I'm finding out, Karen Lehman, is that you have to be careful now with Plant Chicago and the plant in Chicago. And excuse me, I had a conversation with one of the people associated with Plant Chicago, because I put something on my website and I said, hey, if you want more information, go here. And then she wrote to me and she said, well, actually, you kind of confused the two. There's Plant Chicago, then there's the plant, which is no, they call it the plant, and it's in Chicago. And they're actually two different outfits now, because there's been, I guess, a parting of the ways. I don't understand exactly what's going on. I said, you guys need a little branding right here. And she actually agreed with me about that. And then you've got other organizations like Urban Growers Collective, the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, the Chinese American Service League. So these are groups that just received money from Chicago Region Food System Fund, and Fresh Taste, which you're the director of, is part of that. Karen, why don't you start us off and explain what you're trying to achieve by handing out these grants?
Well, when we learned, of course, COVID has been a huge shock to many systems, and the food system especially, actually, I think, has been affected by this. And at the time that the response funds were starting up, we asked, is anybody focusing specifically on food? And people said, we're really going to go right for hunger, which is great, supporting the Greater Chicago Food Depository and others. But there wasn't really a focus on what's happening in the food system as a whole. And we felt that it was really important, both for response and long-term resilience, to put money into the food system. And a lead funder, Foodland Opportunity, which is the Searle funds of the project of the Searle funds of the Chicago Community Trust, said, we'd be interested in supporting something like this. And shortly thereafter, several others came together, and we were able in a very short period of time to pull together $4.2 million. Margot Pritzker has now joined us, so the fund is growing. So, and we're open to others contributing as well. And our sense of this was that we wanted to divide this up in two phases. So, really right now it's about response, but response not just in the conventional emergency food system, but what are neighbors doing for each other? What are some innovative business and nonprofit partnerships doing with each other? What are farmers doing? And if you look at those grantees, they are all responding to this crisis. Groups like Urban Growers Collective and Black Oak Center are collaborating and cooperating with Gourmet Gorilla, which got this very large $27 million award from USDA in the Farm to Families program to distribute food from local farmers in the upper Midwest. And in Chicago, these two organizations are making sure that it gets to the people in their homes. It gets that last half mile, especially in Black and brown communities on the South and West side. You look at the Chinese American Service League, they had seniors who were losing their meal programs, and they don't recognize a lot of the conventional meals that come as real food to them. They say, literally, they say, where's the bok choy? And so Chinese American Service League had a culinary training program. They hired some of their folks to buy, and they're getting food from some of the Chinese wholesalers that had been affected by restaurant closings. And so they started preparing meals for 300 seniors. And they were only able to do that with some of the emergency funding that they had received up through the end of May. And so we're helping them continue that a couple more months. And so you see that people responded. The Street Vendors Association, they are the folks who are making wonderful tamales and selling them on the streets. And of course, with COVID, their businesses were completely disrupted. But that didn't stop them. They have a cooperative that has a kitchen that they created to have food, a place to produce food safely, not just in their own homes. They started making tamales and tacos to give to people in the community who were hungry. And so funding from the fund will then pay their rent, pay for some food, and also pay the vendors for several months in this very difficult time that people have experienced of disruption.
Yeah, here you are helping these organizations, and many of them are local. In fact, you're dealing with a 200-mile radius of Chicago, and so but that includes Wisconsin, and includes Michigan, and includes Indiana, Iowa. It's these are within the sound of our voices, pretty much. These are some of the groups that you're trying to help. But I note that this is part of a broader effort in the country, because one of the people we had on the show was Gary Oppenheimer from ampleharvest.org. And we've got that. You can find that site at our website, but you just go to ampleharvest.org. They're trying to feed people too. So everybody's taking a slightly different approach to, the ampleharvest.org, for example, is getting people to grow stuff in their backyards and then deliver it to food pantries. You're trying to help people with a little bit of cash so that they can keep up their good work and reach out. The important thing is, as you mentioned, it's to go into the communities of color, which are the ones that have been most affected by this COVID outreach. So I assume that is part of the criteria, an important part of the criteria you're looking at.
Yes, actually, organizations that either serve communities of color or are led of people of color are more heavily weighted. We have a rubric because we have reviewers, and those organizations will have actually extra points, because we wanted to make sure that that we redress. We're trying to change the food system at the same time that we are trying to respond to this crisis. And we know that the food system we have is built on systemic racism, and that the fact that a lot of communities don't have access to good food contributes to poor immunity to things like COVID.
Yeah.
So when you look at where the COVID cases have been most intense, and also where there are most of them, they are communities of color in Chicago. And so we think that we want to make sure that the grassroots organizations in those communities see this as a place they can come to get support for the work that they're doing, even from the block club level or from the umbrella organization level. Like we're hoping that organizations like South Shore and West Side United would look at the fund as a way to say, well, we're doing COVID response work, but how could we be accessing some of these funds to make that make a focus on food within that work?
What are
And we have like 20 seconds here, so let's hang on to that question, Peggy. Whatever it was going to be, we're talking to Karen Lehman, and she is with the Chicago Region Food Fund. And I have a couple of questions myself when we come back, and we will talk about how other organizations can qualify for a grant, and that's an important part of this. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and we will be right back. We have Karen Lehman from the Chicago Region Food Fund with us, and talking about ways to get food, good food, to more people in this region. As we mentioned earlier, people are doing it all over the country and in different ways, and this is one of the ways that happening. I hope in your area, wherever you're listening, that is happening as well, because as Karen alluded to earlier, this crisis, and it's not over. Can I make that clear? Can I make that clear? Even as I'm going on Facebook and reading people yelling at each other about whether a restaurant should be open, and people go, "Oh, let them do what they want to do," and it's nuts. It's nuts out there, because this pandemic is so far from over, and there's a lag here as well. I'm sure, Karen, you understand, which is this hits and then people start to suffer, but as it goes on longer, they suffer more, which is where your organization comes in, right? In trying to help people climb out of the hole that's been created by this.
Yes, we saw an opportunity here, actually, to say that the food system needs to be stronger to withstand things like COVID-19, and that we have to build it while it's running. I mean, we have to build the car while it's running. We actually have described this fund as, I've described it as the Run to Keep Up Fund, not just the Response Fund, because in fact, people in the food system have been innovating so quickly, because they've taken this as a place to make changes. And those changes are the things that will get us through a continuation of COVID-19, but also hopefully prepare us for any further shocks from other things coming down the pike later. So if we can address some of the justice issues and some of the just access issues and food business structure issues through this pandemic, hopefully we'll come out with a stronger food system on the other side.
And this is something we talked about last week on the show. We talked about social justice, and we had some folks on who we had a wonderful conversation about this. But what we've learned is that, unfortunately, social justice often doesn't work in our food system, and this is what you've learned, and this is what you're trying to change. Now, one of the things that your grant proposal does is extend not just to this urban area, but as I said, a 200-mile radius. So that means urban areas too. So would you like to address that, Karen?
Well, we are very Chicago-centric. This is a Chicago-centric group of funders, but saying that doesn't say that we are urban. Chicago-centric means that we have 9 million people here, or whatever that number is now, who are the market for many farmers out and processors and food hubs in the surrounding area. And so while we're focused on Chicago as the end market, like we're not focusing on Milwaukee as an end market, we are saying that farmers around Milwaukee, food hubs in Wisconsin, can apply for this, especially nonprofits or nonprofits that are working with businesses. Because we do.
Does it have to be a nonprofit?
For this fund, it needs to be a nonprofit, but there are many creative nonprofit business partnerships. There are others in our group who can support businesses. So, if there's a business that wants that is doing something creative in the food system, we might have a way to support that work as well. For example, with Illinois Stewardship Alliance, the way that we're doing that is that the fund is paying for the administration of the work that they're doing, but another funder is providing support that they can then allocate or allocate to farmers for things like cooling or vehicles or other things that they need for their businesses to adapt and pivot right now in this time when markets have completely changed, especially for those local produce farmers.
So if folks want to, in their organizations, want to qualify for the next grant, what is their next step? What do they need to be aware of?
We wanted to make it an easy process because we know people are really stressed right now. So the first thing you do is go to the website, chicagoregionfoodfund.org. There's an eligibility test. If you are not a nonprofit, you're not eligible for this fund. That doesn't mean you shouldn't contact us. We might have some ideas for you. Mm-hmm. If you are a nonprofit, then it goes through a pretty quick questionnaire with lots of check boxes, some very short, tell us what you want to do. Those then are sorted through, and then people might get a request. They may get a request from us, go ahead, apply, fill out an application. That also is a fairly short form. So we hope to turn these things around pretty quickly, even though it sounds like there are a lot of steps.
Yeah.
And hopefully then they can get some funding in a timely fashion.
And what about if people from the community want to support you? What types of donations are you looking for, and how do people do that?
So on the website, it tells you how to do that. There is a donate button for people who want to donate or less than $5,000. And if you're a donor who wants to give more than $5,000, you get in touch with us and we'll tell you how to do that.
And all that information is on my website, mikenovak.net. I've got all the links. You can click on there and find it. You got like 30 seconds. Tell me a little bit about Fresh Taste.
So Fresh Taste is a funder initiative. It was created by a group of foundations that felt that they could do more working together than separately to change the food system. And we focus on relocalizing the food system and improving equity of access to good food. And Fresh Taste is managing this fund with our fiscal sponsor, Forefront. There is a separate account at Forefront for the fund. And we have been doing this work. I've been here since 2008, building a learning community for funders and also trying to catalyze collaboration.
All right, Karen Lehman, thank you so much for being with us. Like I said, go on the website and find all this. Peggy and I will be right back.
Dinner or lunch.
Welcome back. I warned you that I was going to play that in the second hour. I was going to play it with the tomato guys, and I thought, no, let's try out some new ones so they can hear the new ones. And the new ones were actually really good. So, and as you can see, I've gotten away from the COVID-19 bump music.
And that was also a nice little lead into Attack of the Killer Asparagus.
Shall I promote it again? So that, If you don't have a copy, you need to go to aroundtheblockpress.com. This is my book. It has not sold 60,000 copies, but you can make it sell 60,000 copies just by ordering one. And some people say it's funny, but
perfect summer reading.
But some people think Jerry Lewis was funny. So what are you going to do?
Makes a good gift for Father's Day. Get that order in today.
There you go.
There you go.
Day, yeah, it's the best bathroom book ever, if I might just promote myself. Does this mean now when I go on, when we post this on YouTube, I have to click the little box that says self-promotion or whatever they have there? Is this fun? Is this fun? Well, I'm not making any money off of this, so I don't think that counts. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Speaking of tomatoes, speaking of food, and great conversation with Karen Lehman. It takes us to our own Keep Eating Healthy, and you're hearing those commercials run today. We added a couple of new partners to the campaign. Joe's Blues out of Michigan near South Haven. And you were saying a lot of people know about Frank Corrado and Joe Corrado and Joe's Blues.
I've seen them at a couple of farmers markets. I saw them at a Faith in Place indoor market a couple of years ago and back at the old Good Food Expo.
And the other one that we added is Eden Place Farms. Michael Howard was on the show last week, and we got to talking, and I said, you got to be part of this campaign. And they're a CSA right here in the south side of Chicago. And I sent out a newsletter the other day. If you didn't get it, you need to go to my website, mikenovak.net, MikeNowak.net, and sign up for the newsletter. I don't send them out very often, so they don't crowd. In fact, Constant Contact yells at me because when I don't send out enough, they get mad at you because they, that's how they make their money.
You've not reached your readers in a long time.
Oh yeah, whatever. But I send them out occasionally, and we listed a lot of these organizations on that email, and it's good to see folks are following up. And
if you did not get that email, as Mike said, go sign up. Don't wait, because there'll be another one.
And one of the cool things about Eden Place is that they're putting a little twist on the whole idea of a CSA, where you can cancel an order. That's unheard of. You pay for it when you pick it up or when it's delivered, however they set it up. And so go to my website, go to the Keep Eating Healthy logo, which is on the right side of the page, right under the Black Lives Matter sign, and try out some of these folks. These are the kinds of organizations we were just talking about with Karen Lehman that are making a go of it during very, very difficult times. And we're trying to help them out. So you can help them out by ordering from them. Go ahead and dive into it. Not everything you're going to appreciate this, Peggy. Not everything has to come from Amazon. So there we go. I
Shop local. Shop local, eat local.
Exactly. Shop local, eat local.
Know your farmer.
And sometimes your farmer is yourself. As in the case of our tomatoes, you and I didn't get a chance to talk. It's kind of interesting comparing our yards right now. You live north of the city. I'm smack
close to the lake.
Close to the lake. You've had cooler temperatures, and again, we'll be talking to meteorologist Rick DeMaio in a few minutes about just how cool it's been here, and it has been unusually cool. Obviously not great for tomatoes, but not bad. I mean, my tomatoes look fine. They've got all of them except one plant have blossoms on them, and one of the plants actually has 2 tiny little tomatoes. So I'm very happy. And you're jealous, aren't you?
I have no blossoms on any of the tomatoes at all.
Really?
Or as of Friday. I didn't look at them yesterday, but
yeah.
I don't. I do have a couple blossoms on a couple of pepper plants though.
Oh, good.
Go figure.
I don't know. I stopped growing pepper plants several years ago. They're ubiquitous. They're so easy to get a hold of. I'd rather have the.
I buy heirloom. I do heirloom seeds.
No, I understand. I get it. But I am growing. I've got baby kale and baby chard that Kathleen started with our Happy Leaf grow lights. There we go.
Me too.
But what we've been doing, and it's been very successful, is when you grow in the Happy Leaf, if you take a mason jar, and they have these pellets, round pellets that you put in a little basket at the top, and then you put the fertilizer in the water. It's a water-soluble fertilizer. And then you put the seeds on the pellets and moisten it, and then they germinate, and they send the roots down into the water. Now, yes, sometimes transplanting a root that has started in water to soil can be a little tricky, but not in this case with these especially the baby leaf chard. So I kind of pull them out of the jar, and they got that long trailing root, and then I dig a hole straight into the ground out in the yard, and I just sort of place it in and gently put the soil up around them, and every single one of them has taken like a champ.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have a lot of baby leaf kale, or chard rather, which is kind of like, it ends up being like spinach.
Yeah, love chard.
And this is good because my spinach crop was a disaster. Nothing germinated. And I think it was because the seed was too old. And as I said, during the COVID, you couldn't get seed, and I was just using what I had available in the house. And I think it was just way too old.
Yeah, I've got chard, many, many varieties of kale. some collard greens. I decided I had some collard seeds and they're looking great right at this point.
Well, good. I don't have collard. I have kale, but I've had issues with kale. And that's the other thing is that I had these kale plants.
Oh yeah, they disappeared.
They got eaten by something. And I have had 2 survive. Now that's the regular kale. I think they're Russian red. But the baby leaf kale, I've managed to get a few to germinate, and I think I'm going to have a crop of that. But the regular kale, I had the lacinato, and that's the dinosaur kale, gone, eaten by something out there.
Well, you could still start some now though, because you can plant that later.
Yeah,
I mean now's a good time actually to be starting all the later fall. The stuff you plant in September.
I'm also going to have an awesome beet crop.
Ooh.
Yeah, I got lots of beets out there, and germinated those indoors in soil, not in the Happy Leaf Grow pots, but in soil under Happy Leaf lights though, and then planted those out, and those all have taken, and they're we'll see. I'm just hoping to have a great beet crop.
In my yard, that's chipmunk food.
Everything.
I can't even try.
Everything's chipmunk food in your
Yeah,
yard.
they let the kale go usually, and the cucumbers and stuff like that. But for some reason, the baby beets, the baby carrots, things like that, gone. I think they just dig it up for the seed.
If they get to a certain level of growth, do they leave it alone, or will they just attack it?
Yeah, once it gets bigger.
You gotta get it past a certain stage, right?
Yeah. If you put a larger seedling out, they'll not always leave it. Of course, then they decide you just start take one bite out of every tomato, but that's a whole other problem.
Well, yeah, that's another thing. And we caged our strawberries this year. If you ask Ron Cowgill, my friend, he said his yard has been overrun by the strawberries I gave him half a dozen years ago. Mine are not like that.
Mine kind of settled back this year. Not as many strawberries as usually, but this year the garlic has taken. There's just garlic everywhere. Wild garlic from seed.
I've got some of those too, where it's the soft neck. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the spring garlic, which is great for scapes. We'll be getting the scapes in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and those pop up in my yard too, and I have no idea where they come from. I didn't put them there.
Nope.
In fact, a lot of stuff in my yard, it just pops up, and I wait to see what it is. Often it's just a weed. Every now and then,
you're like, "Wow, what's that?" And I put your nodding onions in the fall. The ones I got from you, those are doing great.
Oh, the
walking onions. Yeah,
the Egyptian walking onions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really, really cool. And then and their little bulbs come on the end of the leaf, and then the weight causes them to drop to the ground, and then they root.
Yeah,
and that's how they walk. And those I got those from Lamanda Joy at Peterson Garden Project a few years ago. In fact, when I was in the hospital, she got me those, and I sat them on the porch. I was recuperating, and they sat on the porch, and they were all dried and desiccated. And I went, "Oh, what a shame! You know what? I'm going to plant them anyway." And I did, and they sprouted. So,
and now they're in my garden too. So
and now they're going to take over the world. All right. Well, we're just about to break here. When we come back, we've got meteorologist Rick DeMaio, and you say he just sent you something. I've got 4 minutes to look at it.
And he's in Florida.
Oh well, I hope he's not in a packed pool. All right, having margaritas.
I think he's with his parents, I think.
Yeah, I think he is too. We'll find out why he's been so cool. I guess we got warmer weather on the way. Your tomatoes will like it, and a lot of other things will like it. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We're glad you're with us today. Please stick around. Rick DeMaio is next.
Rolly, there's a chicken in the car.
A chicken in the car and the car won't go.
That's the way it spells Chicago.
A chicken in the car and the car won't go.
That's the way it spells Chicago.
Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. And my dad actually told me that joke when I was a kid.
What was it? I couldn't understand
in a car and the car can't go. That's how you spell Chicago.
Ah.
I didn't even know there was a song.
Of course there's a song.
Of course there's a song for everything. Rick DeMaio is with us on the phone. Did your dad teach you that song, Rick?
The one about getting in the car that doesn't go, and it's Chicago?
The chicken in the car can't go. That's how you spell Chicago.
Oh, I get it. So the chicken is okay. I get it. No,
I think that answers your question, Mike.
There's not much to get.
Yeah.
It's kind of a dumb joke, is what it
I
is.
thought this was smart radio.
Oh yeah, you get 3 dings on that, Rick. Oh my goodness.
One for each syllable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Smart radio. Oh, that's 4. Anyway. Hey, listen, you just sent us some maps and we were looking at this big blue blob that's sitting over the middle part of the country. And Peggy said, well, where did that come from? I got the same question for you, Rick. Where did it come from?
Well, first off, I don't know if Peg got my text, but I'm down here in Florida. I'm in the Villages visiting my parents.
And we're hoping that you're not in a swimming pool with a bunch of people having margaritas.
No, but if you recall, the last time I was down here was the weekend when all hell broke loose. And I remember walking around the pool where people were having margaritas going, I don't think they're getting it. And I distinctly remember sitting at a table with a bunch of people going, this whole pandemic thing is not Trump's fault. And I'm like saying, I didn't say it was, but you people down here don't seem to be getting it. And sure enough, I've been down here, or haven't been down here for 3 months, and it seems like the whole world has come to a screeching halt in some degree, right? But I am not at the pool with margaritas because that pool has been closed since. But when I was at church this morning with my parents, it was funny how the priest called it the Canova virus. And I was thinking, I don't know if there's a second one, but he obviously didn't get that part right. But
oh my goodness.
Nonetheless,
wow.
the Canova virus.
But
things are quiet down here in Florida. It's, you know what? It's surprisingly not as hot, even in parts of the Southeast. In fact, when I was driving down here the other day, I drove through literally 4 to 5 inches of rain, and the same large area of upper low pressure that was over the Great Lakes that kind of formed east of the trough that came through with Cristobal last week kind of nudged itself east and kind of nudged itself to the southeast. So most of the southeast is actually going to be very unstable with that blue area that you were referring to of cool air in the upper levels of the atmosphere. But for Chicago, it's literally going to keep us on the backside of the upper trough, and the backside of an upper trough is really the front side of an upper ridge. So that means dry weather, even though we'll have temperatures probably approaching the upper 80s, maybe 90 degrees by the middle of the week. The dew point temperatures are going to stay rather comfortable. You kind of saw that on Friday afternoon when that front came down, and boy, yesterday only 66 for a high at O'Hare. And so far, temperatures for the month of June have been averaging about 6 to 7 degrees above normal. So the last couple of days, including today and tomorrow, features generally below normal temperatures. And the next 6 to 10 days, generally below normal, mainly due to the fact that the overnight lows will probably be a little bit cooler than average. Afternoon high is still rather warm, but this is very pleasant weather for the next 5 days.
Yeah, we were talking about it in terms of being outside. It's perfect. In terms of some of the crops you're trying to grow, maybe not so much, but it's not really going to hurt them.
It's better than 90 and super humid for the tomatoes.
Exactly, because then your tomatoes don't set seed or set fruit. But my question to you, Rick, which was kind of interesting because this seemed like this all started when the remnants of Cristobal came up through the center of the country, and then how much effect did that system have on creating the weather we're getting right now?
I think you got to go all the way back to Alberto and Beryl as well. I mean, both of those storms moved up into the southeast part of the United States and pushed these blobs of tropical warmth into the upper levels of the atmosphere. And when that does that, it creates these kind of U-shaped patterns as opposed to more of a weak progressive flow that you typically get in late May and early June. If you think about it, guys, how many times have we talked about tornado outbreaks since early or almost since like the middle of April around here. Zero, right? This has not been the type of spring that has been rendering or promoting large-scale, widespread severe weather outbreaks. Even though we had a couple of really decent wind outbreaks come through, it's largely been absence of tornadoes due to the fact that the atmosphere has become this somewhat blocked pattern. So you mentioned Cristobal, but you also have to mention Alberto and Beryl. And once we kind of get rid of that big block in the atmosphere, we'll probably end up going into a fairly warm and fairly dry pattern. In fact, even beyond the 8th to 14th, into the next 30 to 60 days, it looks like we stay relatively dry in the upper Midwest. And usually with that, you get pretty warm temperatures. But as long as you stay dry, you generally tend to keep the humidity levels down, and that'll keep somewhat, of a cooler pattern during the overnight lows. So I think that's the trend we're kind of getting into over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and probably in the next 5 to 6 weeks as well. Generally less rain, still somewhat on the warm side, but with the lower dew points, that'll allow their overnight low temperatures at least drop into the mid to upper 50s, maybe even lower 60s.
Wow. And the other thing that's been going on the last few days, which has just been remarkable, is the winds. We've had really, really some terrific winds, which is also causing things to dry out a bit.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about last week, was the fact that you can get, some fairly decent evaporation without any wind this time of year just due to the sun, but you increase not only the horizontal evaporation, the vertical evaporation, and then when you stay dry overnight, you can keep that evaporation going not for 6 to 12 hours during the middle of the day, but maybe 12 to 18 hours. So as bad as the farmers had it with the recent heavy rain that now seems like it was about 2 weeks ago, this has actually been pretty decent weather, good what we call recovery weather over the past week to 10 days, and that'll continue. The only thing that unfortunately continues to go trending in the opposite direction, all the Great Lakes, record high levels, and as soon as you get any sort of a northeast wind, you get a lot of beach erosion. So if anybody goes down to the beaches in Chicago, they're not doing good.
All right, give us a 10-second forecast.
All right, low to mid 70s today, upper 60s lakefront, upper 70s tomorrow, low to mid 80s on Tuesday, and it looks like maybe mid to 80s, mid to upper 80s and near 90 by Wednesday and Thursday, and then next weekend back to cooler and a little bit wetter as well.
All right, thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
Until next time, go green or
go home.
Didn't miss much.